Welcome back, macroeconomics students. This is lecture video number 8, and we're going to talk about money today. We've got one more video coming out. It will be coming out around Thursday, and we will have your fourth exam. Your fourth exam will open up on Friday. You'll have all Friday and all Saturday to decide when you want to take it. But again, remember, it's going to be 5 questions, 5 essay questions. It will be timed, so once you start it, don't pause it and then, go have lunch or something. Once you start it, you can pause it for a few minutes, but it is timed. You don't have to take it Friday, but you'll have to take it sometime Friday or Saturday. And that'll be our fourth and final test for the semester, okay? There might be a few bonus questions on it, worth a few extra points that we're going to go over a few of those items in today's lecture. Things that are interesting have to do actually with money and things I think, it's good that you know about. All right. Next lecture will be on fiscal and monetary policy and the obviously the Federal Reserve System, all right? It's going to be quite extensive, so it's going to be a bit longer than most of the other videos, so pay attention because we'll have a lot of ground to cover. All right, well today we're going to talk about money, the root of all evil. And basically the widest definition of money is it's an asset that can be used to easily purchase goods and services, right? And that's about as wide a definition as we can get. And different times throughout history, different things were used as money. Okay, in your textbook you talk about cigarettes in World War II. Even then, when in prisons they used cigarettes, and then when cigarettes were banned. In prisons, cans of mackerel were used. Okay, if we go way back to the Roman times, the Latin word for cattle is pecu, and pecunia. Pecunia, that's where we get the word money, and that meant cattle. And because if you had a lot of cattle, let's face it, back then you were considered wealthy, all right? Also, we also get the phrase not worth your salt, because salt back in the Roman days was used to pay the Roman soldiers. And that's where they get the expression, hasn't been used too much recently, but years ago, you're not worth your salt meant that you weren't doing your job, or you weren't pulling your weight, okay? And it came from having the Roman soldiers being paid in salt. And if the centurion was giving the Roman soldier his salary, his salt, and he wasn't doing a good job, he might say, well, you're not worth your salt. Anyway, it can be used for a lot of different items could be used for money. The key is that it's an asset that can be easily used to buy goods and services. Okay, well, what does money do? Well, remember we talked about gains from trade early in the semester. Well, money, it maximizes the gains in trade, okay? It makes indirect exchanges possible, solving the double coincidence of wants. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that if we go back 300 years or 400 years and we're in a little town and we're all together and you're making plows, and another person is making, let's say, saddles. And you need a saddle, and that person needs a plow. All right, you can trade for each other for what you're making. But it's a coincidence, all right? It just so happens if you need a plow and that person needs a saddle or vice versa, you were lucky that you had that coincidence of wants. But if you didn't need what the other person was making, but he wanted what you were making, then you'd have to find a third party or a fourth or a fifth. Could get really complicated. So money solves this problem. You don't necessarily have to find someone who wants what you're making and you want what they're making. Okay? Now Adam Smith, our rabbit here is working his way through The Wealth of Nations. In Adam Smith, he says, money really doesn't make anything in and of itself, but it's like a highway through the air, which means it doesn't take up space, but it helps facilitate trade. Okay? All right. Now, when we talk about money, how are we measuring? What is the overall measure of the money supply? The narrowest definition of the money supply is M1. Okay? And M1 is cash and currency circulation. It's also traveler's checks. Some of you may not be familiar with traveler's checks. I don't think any of my children have ever seen one, but traveler's checks used to be very popular. You would go to a bank and you would buy traveler's checks if you were going to take a trip somewhere, and you would sign all the checks in the book, and they're really very, very nice looking checks. And then when you went to another country or someplace you're going to buy something, you would countersign them, and you would use them, as currency. They were very popular. They're not as popular, still around. They're not all that popular anymore. But anyway, cash, the money in circulation, traveler's checks, and checkable bank deposits. That's all considered M1. Okay? Now, the broader definition of the money supply would be M2. That's all of M1, and it is, say the key is all of M1, and it's the savings deposits, okay? And what they call near monies, time deposits. If you have a savings account that you put money in, but you can't touch it for a number of years, or some time deposit like that, money market funds, or small CDs, which are certificates of deposit. All those are part of M2. So M2 is quite a bit broader than M1. In fact, there's a 4-to-1 ratio between M2 and M1. All right? Okay, now we're getting into the key elements, and I guarantee this will be on the test that's going to open up on Friday. Types of money and the roles of money. Okay, the types of money. The most basic type of money, especially when we go back hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years, is called commodity money. What does that mean? Commodity money, it wasn't an asset that can easily be used to purchase goods and services, but it, in and of itself, it had value. So typically it would be gold or silver coins, because in and of themselves they had value. Now, obviously, if you're going to, they didn't have CVS's thousands of years ago, but if you're going somewhere, it was a whole heck of a lot easier to carry a bag of gold or silver coins than it was to herd your cattle into town to go buy something. So gold and silver, became sources of commodity money. But the main and most important point is that in and of itself they have value. For instance, if you were in Venice, we'll go back hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and you have a bag of Venetian gold coins, and each one is an ounce of gold. All right, and you take a trip and you go to Greece and you land, and they said, "Oh, well, sorry, we don't accept Venetian coins." You say, "I don't care if you accept Venetian coins or not. Here, each one of these coins is an ounce of gold. Melt it down and pour it into your mold and make a Grecian coin out of it." That's commodity money. In and of itself, it has value. Okay? Now, interestingly enough, it's even true nowadays. If any of you have some pennies in your pocket, here I've got a penny from 2019, nice shiny penny. And here I have a penny from 1969, okay? Guess what? This is worth 1.6 cents. Why? Because any penny that was made before 1982 and before is made out of copper, okay? And the copper content in this penny, just the copper content alone, is worth 1.6 cents. This is mostly zinc. Whatever it's worth, some folks say, well, it's not even worth a penny, but this could be considered commodity money because in and of itself, it has value. The copper content in this penny has value, okay? Now, it's interesting, they used to make pennies for a while during World War II out of steel. Now, these are steel pennies because copper was in short supply during the war, so they started making them out of steel. Now these, because they're somewhat rare, and remember, if something becomes more scarce, its value goes up, price goes up. These are worth, they could be worth, and not a whole heck of a lot, maybe 19 cents up to, some are worth maybe 15, 16, 17, maybe even up to $20, depending on what shape they're in, okay? But if you ever find a 1943, because that's when they started making them out of steel, a 1943 copper penny, keep it, because it's worth a tremendous amount of money. Because when they switched over to steel in 1943, they still had just a little bit of copper left in the stamping press that they were stamping out these machines, these coins, and they didn't clear them out completely, so they ran them, and they ran about 40 copper pennies from 1943. So if you ever find one, there's still about 10 or 12 in circulation somewhere in the world. So if you ever run across a copper 1943 penny, make sure you keep it because it's worth a huge amount of money. All right. So that is commodity money. And guess what? Even back then, governments were trying to figure out how can we increase the money supply, and fatten our bank accounts. And you would think, well, with commodity money, it'd be rather difficult. But what the kingdoms did was they would, from time to time, they would recall the coins of the realm. They recall them, and what they would do, they would take the coins and they would either shave them just slightly, shave the face of them, or they would clip the edges just slightly. Now you think, how's that going to work? Well, if you take all the coins in the realm and you just take a light shaving off the face, or if you clip the edges of the coin, you're going to end up with a lot of gold or silver shavings, okay? And what that did was it inflated the money supply, it made the kingdom a little richer, but it lowers the purchasing power of the money. So even with commodity money, they still had governments trying to inflate the currency, okay? And that's the reason, one of the reasons, why do you think they have the little serrations on the edges of a quarter in your pocket? You think it's just so it makes it easier to roll down the carpet? No, the serrations were there because it told folks, if governments, going back hundreds and hundreds of years, told people if the government was clipping the edges or not. Anyway, that was an early form of government inflation, okay? Also, we had a little problem with, sometimes it was difficult making change, okay? So they came up with what was called pieces of 8. You might have heard pieces of 8 in an old pirate movie or something. Those were actual coins that you could break into 8 pieces, which is pretty ingenious, to make change, okay? So that's where this coin, pieces of 8, were called because there were 8 pieces. Also, it's where an old high school cheer that you probably never heard of, maybe your parents, probably your grandparents have heard, which is 2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits, $1. Everyone for, then you would insert your high school name, so-and-so high school, stand up and holler. That's where we got that cheer from, all right? But if you ever have watched an old movie, let's say from the 1940s, and someone's buying a newspaper or something, say, how much is that? And say, oh, it's 2 bits. I always used to wonder when I used to watch, I said, what the heck is 2 bits? Well, 2 bits is 25 cents, okay? And they got it from the old piece of 8. 2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits, $1, okay? Now, as the economy's gotten more sophisticated, it was getting a little cumbersome always to be carrying around bags and bags of silver or gold, even copper. What happened was, and this was early on, again, if people wanted an easier way to use money, they were looking for something that would you could redeem for this precious metal. And they talk about the early banking system, how it started. Well, if we go back again, hundreds and hundreds of years, who was the person in town that had a secure room? Well, it would be the gold or silversmiths. They had a safe, all right? And many times folks would, if you're going on a journey or a time, they would take their bags of gold or silver and they bring it to the goldsmith and say, hey, can you hold these for us? And the goldsmith would give them a paper receipt and say, okay, this is your receipt for 2 pounds of silver or whatever, okay? So they would take these receipts and they would go to town and guess what? A lot of the merchants would look at that and they would know if the merchant or the goldsmith was reputable. They would say, well, we'll take that receipt as payment, okay? And that was an early form of what we would call commodity-backed money, all right? Commodity-backed money, it's paper. Does the paper have any intrinsic value? No, it doesn't have any intrinsic value. The only value it has the value because it is backed up by gold or silver, something of value, all right? That is commodity-backed money, okay? Again, a lot of banks, this goes back a couple hundred years, banks would issue their own currency very often, okay? And depending on the strength of the bank, your paper money would be more readily acceptable or not. But again, remember, in and of itself, the paper has no value. The only value it has is that the fact that it can be redeemed for something like gold or silver, something that had value. Anyway, going back hundreds of years, and this might be an extra bonus question on the fourth exam. How do you think the Confederacy became known as the land of Dixie during the Civil War? Remember the Confederacy was called the land of Dixie? Well, the Confederacy became the land of Dixie because one of the strongest banks during the 1800s, it was the bank, Citizens Bank of Louisiana, okay? And the Citizens Bank of Louisiana issued their own currency. And down in Louisiana, down in New Orleans, it was a very heavy French influence. So the paper money on one side had English, and on the other side it had French, okay? And one of the most popular denominations then was the $10 bill. So what 10 in French is DIX, which actually it's not pronounced Dix, it's pronounced Dix. But the folks down south would call it Dix or Dixies. So since that was such a popular currency, the South, it was spread throughout the South, and the South became known as the land of Dixie. Okay? All right. Anyway, again, commodity-backed money, that wasn't necessarily backed by gold and silver, but it could have been. Okay? It was backed by the bank. Now, the Union issued the first national currency, which they called greenbacks, to help finance the Civil War. But even the greenbacks, they were not backed up by gold until 1873, okay? So even the greenbacks weren't really backed up by something of precious value. So we have commodity money, commodity-backed money, and then we have fiat money. Now, fiat money is money by decree. It's because the government says this is money, it declares this to be money by fiat, by declaration, all right? What's that backed up by? Well, fiat money, the only thing fiat money is backed up by is your faith in the federal government, okay? So it's not really backed up by anything of precious value. We came off that standard, the gold standard, back in 1971, and so ever since then, it's just backed up by the faith and trust in the U.S. government, okay? And that's fiat money. Now, the problem with fiat money, well, the problem with fiat money is it can be easily printed. You know, we can end up, if the Federal Reserve and the Treasury get together and they start printing money, we can end up with bills that are going to look like this. These aren't real, but here's $1 million bill, and if they get really busy, here's a $1 billion bill. I'm sorry we're not in class because I'd give out one to each of you in class, but anyway, that's fiat money. It can be printed, okay? And why would a government do that? Well, if a government, for instance, after World War I, Germany had a lot of war reparations. How are they going to pay all these debts? Well, they went to the printing press. They started printing money. And brother, did they ever print money. What happened was we not only got inflation, we got hyperinflation. It went through the roof. And the problem with inflation is your money loses its purchasing power. Okay, and that's exactly what happened to Germany between World War I in the 1920s and World War II. Okay, another thing is it can be counterfeited, not easily, but a little bit more easily than a solid gold coin can be, all right? And this has happened a number of times. Different countries will try to flood our economy with counterfeit currency, okay? All right, so anyway, again, you talked about the banks issued their own currency, but again, when you just trusted the bank, or in the case of the Union, you trusted the government in those greenbacks during the Civil War, that wasn't commodity-backed money. It was just your faith and trust in the government. But after 1873, the greenbacks were backed up by gold. Okay? So those are the types of money. Second part, the role of money. Okay? Well, the role of money, the key role of money is it's a medium of exchange, all right? Used to trade for goods and services, but not necessarily for consumption. Now, for instance, the cigarettes or the cans of mackerel, you say, well, you know, you could eat those. Yeah, but that's not the idea. When you're using it as a medium of exchange, you're not using it for consumption in and of itself. You're using it to buy other goods and services that you can consume, okay? So that's the key role is a medium of exchange. Second one, a store of value. Well, what does that mean, a store of value? Well, aside from high or hyperinflation, certainly, typically money is a store of value in the sense that, for instance, let's say it's early fall and you have $50 in paper money, okay? And your friend has half a garage full of bushels of apples, and that's worth $50 as well, okay? Well, we go through the fall, we go through the winter, we're into the spring, and which of you do you think the apples or the paper money is going to store its value better? Well, obviously, your paper money is going to be a better store of value than the apples, because by the springtime, half or more of the apples are probably rotten, so it didn't store his value as well. So money is a medium of exchange, and it's a store of value. Again, going on the assumption that we're not going to have hyperinflation. And the last is a unit of account, okay? Unit of account means if you went to CVS and you picked up a bottle of shampoo and you looked at the price tag doesn't say, a length of rope, half a bushel of wheat and 3 candles, and you're thinking, oh gee, I have to go out to my car, open the trunk and get that length of rope and wheat and the corn and the apples and all these other things to buy stuff in CVS. That would really be a problem if we had to do that for every single thing we bought. No, when you go to a store, what do? You look at the item, you look at the price tag, and what does it say? It says, $4.95. All right? So that's what a unit of account means or is. It's needed to set the prices. It sounds like a small thing, but just think if every time you went to buy something, you had to try to figure out all the different items that they wanted for what you were going to buy. It'd be a real problem, okay? All right, so that's basically it for our lecture on money. Our last lecture for the semester is going to be on fiscal policy, monetary policy, the Fed, how the banking system, how it creates money. That will be coming out on Thursday. And again, our last exam will be opened up on Friday. You'll have Friday and Saturday to take it, and that'll conclude the semester. Again, I'm sorry we had to use this format. I really like teaching in class, and I hope to see you again in some other class, and I hope everybody, you stay well. Looks like we got beyond the critical point. We're on the road to recovery here, so everyone be of good cheer, all right? Okay, I will see you on Thursday.